There is an eighth dimension beyond that which is known to normies. It is a dimension as vast as the planes and timeless as the directional pad. It is the middle ground between reality and fantasy, between science and imagination, and it lies between the pit of man's rage and the summit of his elation. This is the dimension of imagination, action, and wonder. It is an area we call the gaming experience, and we shall be your guides. I'm Not Much 23.
And I'm ChoasAssassin.
And this is Gamer Experience. And joining us for this episode is Lord Greyhawk from our only bonus episode on Gen Con 2023.
Hi there. I hope to maybe give you all a little bit on Gen Con 2024 when I make the trip this year.
I'll be looking forward to that. I hope our listeners will be too. And Preston, from one of our character stories episodes, I think it was like 4 or 3.
It was 3.
We had like 5 so far, so. But yeah, this month, we are actually going to be looking at the gaming experiences of the past. Because, well, we got to know where we come from to see how far we've come. And perhaps maybe pave the way to the future. So, Lord Greyhawk, I know you have a lot of experience, especially with tabletop.
Yeah, I've been gaming since 1981, playing in a football field at my junior high school with all my friends, and GMing ever since then.
So what was it like during those early editions of Dungeons and Dragons? And Preston, you can chime in too.
Okay.
It was a really neat group experience with everybody working as a team. That's one thing that's kind of missing in modern day sometimes. You had the power gamers back then, it was different. We also had a habit of, none of us had any money, so whoever could afford a book or get their parents to buy a book for them would get a book that none of us had. And between the gaming group, we had all of the first edition AD&D books, several of the modules that we borrowed things from, several of the basic D&D expansions and books, lots of old green character sheets, and probably one set of dice apiece. In fact, one of the more hilarious memories I have back in the day was complaining to another player for wasting money buying extra dice, because who in their right mind needs more than one set of dice? And I think most of you have seen my current collection of 3,000 plus dice. Apparently, I've evolved.
I don't think I've actually seen your full collection, but I've seen a part of your collection.
Yeah, it's gotten pretty big. And also things like 30-sided dice were this weird new thing, which I guess they're still kind of weird and not really new. Just you still don't see them much.
Preston,
And
What's that?
what do you remember from the early editions of Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh my God. So my early experiences was more towards the fact that my mom couldn't afford a lot of stuff. My parents were divorced. So I had my dad who would never buy stuff like that, because that was basically during the time of the Satanic Panic.
Oh.
So a lot of it was theater of the mind more than anything else.
So no battle mats, no miniatures, no drawing out.
Nope.
No drawing out shapes with permanent or wet erase marker?
I did with permanent marker at one point, but that wasn't until I was in high school.
And then what happened in high school?
Oh gosh. So I was, playing a little bit. I still couldn't get any material. So played for a little bit, graduated from high school, ended up working in a movie theater and got invited to a D&D second edition game at a friend's house, and played for a little bit until I enlisted in the military.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You joined the chair force.
Yeah, wait, watch it. Watch it.
Air Force, second best pilots in the American military.
Well,
Gotta say that, being former Navy.
Oh, I
Yeah.
know. Hey, yeah. Lord Greyhawk, I have no problem ribbing, you ribbing the Air Force, but anybody else, I'd have to be concerned. Anyway, enough of that. So basically, the funny thing was 20 years later. Was it 20 years? Yeah, it was about 20 years. My son brings me to a Pathfinder Society table, and the rest pretty much was history. And that's just the tabletop side.
So,
I remember when my dad was teaching me D&D. When I went to visit him over the summer, they had already started a campaign, and my dad wanted me to join in. I had no idea how to build a character or anything. So the first character I built, my dad wanted to start me out with just a basic fighter. Forget what my race was. I think I was a Warforged, and he was running, I think, a first edition game. It was like a toss up between the editions, but he explained THACO to me. We did a session, and it just fell apart because of the other people at the game. Just they didn't want to play. So I got one thing. Then my dad showed me Dungeons and Dragons online to kind of teach me more. And then just after I graduated, he found out about Pathfinder. And so just having the experience from what my dad said over the years and everything else, after I started Pathfinder, I ended up meeting Preston, and just rest is history.
okay, that's one thing
Yeah.
that's timeless. Groups falling apart due to scheduling conflicts.
If I feel like it happens more now than it used to, but then again, it used to be we met at school between classes, so nobody missed the game.
Yeah.
Now everybody works different schedules, and some people lose interest, other new people come in, and just some people grow up and never mature, which also can cause problems with games. At least in junior high school, nobody worried about anybody being mature.
Wait, we're supposed to be mature in the game?
Oh gosh.
I wouldn't be surprised if Gary Gygax and or Dave Arneson had that issue too.
I would say they did. The famous Gary Gygax quote of "Are you sure you want to do that?" is likely because of that.
Mm.
What? I was wondering where that ever came from.
How
I swear,
old
I
is
found myself saying, "Are
Dungeons
you
and
sure?"
Dragons?
But what do you notice about your tabletop role-playing experiences back in the day compared to now?
My biggest one back in the day, well, in first edition, you had 2 set game worlds. Second edition came along with a bunch more, including Forgotten Realms, the one everybody seems to love now. It started with Greyhawk, Blackmore, which was part of Greyhawk, and later on Dragonlance. But nobody played in those set worlds. We got all the books and we added them and borrowed. Everybody was running their own campaign. Today, it's really hard to get a game together that's not set in a pre-existing setting. Now, the settings are much better written today than they were, with the exception of the death of the old worlds like Greyhawk, and according to Margaret Weiss, Dragonlance. Apparently, she was not happy with the 5th edition rendition of her world. But everybody wants to play in a preset world now. Don't see nearly as many gaming groups looking to build their own setting. That's probably the biggest difference I can see.
I know when I've run my homebrew games, I do similar to what you've done. I use the base template of the Pathfinder world, but in my version, certain races aren't kill on sight. Certain things just don't happen.
Yeah.
I've written kind of like my own somewhat history for it, but it's still heavily based there. So I'd say I'd take probably about at least 85% of that, and that have that as kind of like the basic building blocks of my world.
You haven't played in my setting.
I've played once or twice in yours, but that game fell apart because somebody decided to use a third-party druid class that decided to literally do a bull in a china shop.
I have a setting that I started building in 1994 in second edition AD&D. Into third, it evolved. And then when I switched to Pathfinder, because fourth edition wasn't my cup of tea, I converted it again. I'm in the process of converting it again for second edition Pathfinder. And it's its own world. I borrow some things from the existing settings because all good writers borrow from other good writers. But for the most part, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the settings. Like I said, they're very well written, especially in the case of Pathfinder and Starfinder. The writers are legends in the field, and they've put so much thought into it that there's just so much to do.
Yeah.
The Forgotten Realms had gotten that way, although the current thing has been kind of to push everything into the Forgotten Realms from the other worlds and glut it to the point where it's too full. But I've never seen a 5e game that was not set in that setting.
I would make my own setting if I was actually able to run on a regular basis, but it would take me a lot of work because I would build mine from scratch because my world building style, because I've actually making settings for non-tabletop role-playing game, like forum role-playing, I figured out pretty quickly that my style is pedantry.
Pedantry? Please explain what that is.
Pedantry. Basically, I want to know or work out, or in this case, make up the details of how this world works that other people wouldn't really give a fuck about. And it's like, okay, if there's a train, I ask, what's the track gauge? What's the rail made out of? What's the loading gauge? What do the locomotives look like? How are they coupled together? How do the trains stop?
You want to know the flavor behind the world, how everything works. It's
Why
like,
did they
I go
choose
to a
this
city,
mode
what's the
for it?
city look like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Detail orientation.
Yeah, pedantry. Extreme detail orientation, pretty much, to the point where most people wouldn't care about it. Because I believe that the little details like that really, everything's connected.
As a GM, that's the number one thing to having a memorable game. If the players can visualize their location, what they're doing, if there's a villain there that is just so bad that the whole group just wants to
Despises
see it. Yeah, exactly. And they come together as a team to defeat these bad guys, and the stories that are created are the most memorable. And sometimes things happen in addition to that that just make it to where you even mention it to some member of an old gaming group from 10 or 20 years ago, and they're like, oh yeah, I remember when we did such and such and this happened or that happened.
The stories that, well, yes, they are stories, they've become legends in their own right.
Yeah.
But, I mean, tabletop role-playing games do not exist in a vacuum. Because alongside the first ever edition of Dugngeons and Dragons, video games were not that far behind.
Not really.
And I know they influenced each other, which is kind of my segue to what was video gaming like back in those days?
Oh my goodness.
Reported.
Well, we all know the first commonly known game is Pong, although there were games that predate that from the 60s and 50s.
But they're not mainstream. The first mainstream would be Pong.
Yeah, because the older ones required such specialized equipment that only like university labs and government agencies and large businesses would have them.
Yeah, and it would be a game that one group would create, and if you didn't work there, you never saw that game.
Yeah.
I actually just got through the other day listening to an audiobook about Sid Meier and hearing him talk about games he created in just that way back in the late 60s and early 70s. And it was pretty interesting to hear all these different things that were in some ways far more advanced than Pong. But my first video game that I played was a arcade copy of Asteroids. And we're not even talking the Atari version. We're talking the little pencil thin drawings of asteroids and the little
Triangular ship.
I can't think of the greater than. Yeah, the little triangular ship that you never wanted to teleport or you die horribly. And it got tons of quarters. And around the same time, My mom bought this video game system from Radio Shack called the Radio Shack 3-in-1 system, which was this weird brown flat box that had two controllers that snapped into the sides that were hardwired into it, and all they had was an up-down slider and a reset button. And you had like three different Pong variant games. It was like tennis, hockey, and something else, and paddleball, I think it was. But it plugged into the back of your TV with the two screws, which I'm sure some of you have probably dealt with in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And it was black and white. And then right around 78, my grandfather bought an Atari 2600. Well, the other arcade games had come out, and it was a pale imitation. The fact that you could play it in your living room was just amazing. And on those great big Magnavox console TVs with the radios up top that weighed about 600 pounds, with a little Atari sitting on top, and we'd go for the weekend and go to my grandparents and play Atari.
What was the first video game you played, Preston?
Oh my God. It goes back to, gosh, I want to say it was a Tempest. And we're talking arcade cabinet, not console thing or anything, or computer. Tempest was
spinner.
Yep.
If it was Tempest, if it was the older version, it had the spinner. If it was the slightly newer version, it had the trackball.
I played both versions.
Yep.
What was yours?
Mine?
Yeah.
Well, I was born in 1988, just a bit of context. It was the combination Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt cartridge for the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Goodness, I remember that.
My mom bought me the special edition version that also included track and field with the little running pad.
Yeah, I think my dad had an Atari 2600, but I was too young to play it at the time.
Mm.
But yeah, my first gaming console was a NES. In fact, I still have a NES. I don't know if it works, so I want to recap it before I turn it back on again.
You do know about the little Easter egg of the second player controller on Duck Hunt, don't you?
Yeah, they can control the duck.
Yes.
And our zapper actually worked.
I never had a problem with ours.
Yeah, I think
I've heard a lot of people that did, but yeah.
I think we got a later revision. But the curious thing with our family is that we never stuck with one company for consoles, because the next gaming console was the Sega Genesis, and then the Sony PlayStation, and Microsoft Xbox.
Yep.
Of course, with some Windows gaming in between, like Roller Coaster Tycoon.
I think my first PC game was Wizardry 2, The Revenge of Wordna, which was one of those step-by-step movers, and you had monsters that would come up that were black and white. It was a very, very basic game. You actually had to boot the game with the disc in the drive. It functioned as its own boot disc.
Oh, wow, that is old.
Then you had to go to the back of the book, and there was a list of numbers, black numbers on a dark magenta page so that you couldn't photocopy it on the old school printer copiers. And you'd find out, and it would tell you to go to such and such line, such and such one. You'd have to type in what it was for the security.
Copy protection.
Yep.
Really old anti-piracy.
The early stages.
That was the best way, because while you could make copies of a game and give it to hundreds of people, not everybody had a copier to work from, and the ones that were huge, and the copies were horrible.
Mm-hmm.
You could handwrite them, though.
In some cases, yeah, but in other cases, it was like page X of such and such book, and so you had to have the manual to look at a certain page, to look at a certain word, and if you didn't write down everything exactly as it was supposed to be, you couldn't play it, because if you didn't have the book. And that one page on Wizardry, it probably had 200 numbers, and I think each one was like a 6-digit or 8-digit number or code. It was letters and numbers, if I remember right. And worth the effort of doing that much work, because right after I got that, I also got a copy of Bard's Tale, which actually took advantage of the Tandy 1000 graphics, the old 8088 chipset.
Did you ever write in like basic programs from like magazines or books?
Basic, no. AppleSoft, yes. We did Missile Command on our junior high school Apple IIe, and also used to stay after school and learn computer programming from the computer teacher. So we got free access to. He had a Apple IIe, a Commodore 64, and this other thing. I think it was a compact briefcase type computer that actually
Oh, wow.
bolted to itself. It was this really crazy thing with like a 6-inch screen. And none of us ever messed with that because you couldn't play any games on it. And you had to know, I think it was C++ or C plus rather, to be able to use it because it didn't use BASIC. They also had TRS-80s, but we avoided them like the plague. And some of us were actually asked not to play on them after we figured out that the computers that the school used for attendance also used TRS-80s, and if you knew how to backdoor your way in, which wasn't hard at the time, you could do things like change grades and stuff like that on.
But the thing that kind of blows me away is that I'm old enough to do the back in the day things like, back in my day, our cartridges didn't have loading screens.
I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I've got. I'll tell the story later if you want to finish.
No, I was going to go into something else. Go ahead.
Okay, so one of my early days, basically my first computer was a Commodore 64, and one of the early games I played was a text-based RPG called Assault on Memory Alpha that was put on a cassette.
Oh.
Yep.
You loaded it from a cassette.
Fortunately, I never had to experience that.
That was wild. It's wild, let me tell you. Then basically, I ended up picking up some cartridge. The cartridge game I picked up was a little side-scrolling flight game called Zaxxon. A lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
One of the many games I miss playing. Tempest was another one. That basically essentially, I guess you could say, was my first taste of a computer. Programming in BASIC, just simple stuff. I dabbled with a TRS-80. Yeah, basically, I could say I've got some experience on that, but I mean, I do remember the days though of going to the mall and going into the actual arcade and playing games to my heart's content.
Yeah.
Or until I ran out of quarters. That one came first.
Yeah, I wonder which one came first.
I'll give you a hint. It was the quarters.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
especially back then. Even if you're really skilled, games were programmed to eat quarters.
Yeah, I can think of a few games that I lost many a quarter in.
Oh yeah.
Gauntlet, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, one of the X-Men games. Gauntlet was the big one.
Yeah. 4 players dumping quarters constantly.
Yep. And if there was an open spot, somebody was leaving quarters up by the controller to basically reserve their spot.
Yep.
Apparently, over in the UK on the home micros, apparently cassette was the most popular way to actually distribute games.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, my first computer that I actually got from a garbage dump because the schools had decided they were way too old was a Commodore PET 2000.
Oh my
Apparently,
goodness.
these computers, which were made in like 1976, so they were 10 years old when I was in junior high school. And I didn't even get that until I had already graduated. So it was like 1988, and I had a 12-year-old computer with the built-in monitor, built-in keyboard, built-in cassette drive, did not have a cooling fan, which caused the 7K of memory to overheat within about an hour of your first turning it on.
Wow.
Gosh, those bring back memories.
The coolest thing I remember about the PET 2000, though, was watching Buck Rogers in the 23rd, 24th, 25th century. I forget what century he was in. 25th?
Yep.
If you look at the bridge of I'm drawing a blank as to what the name of the big home ship was, but all of the computer monitors on that bridge
were PET
were
monitors.
all Commodore PETs. Oh,
You
and
got it.
screens. If you look, they had the little square screen too, and sometimes you'd see the cassette drives.
I
Pretty
remember.
funny.
So, other than the graphics improving, how did the video game
Didn't
experience change from then to now? Of course, I'm going to point out that used to be when you bought a game, that was it. maybe with a few PC games, you could maybe download a patch or two after release, after you use dial up to get on the internet and spent like 4 or 5 days downloading like a 128 megabyte patch. That was it.
And
If
heaven forbid if somebody called.
yeah,
Mhm.
if your cartridge game, especially or PlayStation disc, if there was a glitch or a bug, it was there for good.
Part of the game, there were no updates. Probably the biggest thing I can think of, and it happened during the NES. When the NES first came out, they didn't have the option, and every video game before it, and most of the games that were simultaneous with it, you were never able to save your game. It wasn't until Nintendo started adding a battery to some of their packs that you could actually save the game on the cartridge and continue playing later.
which I believe was for the N64, is the first time they had actual
No.
memory packs, I thought.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
the memory packs.
Yeah.
I remember
Before that,
some of
there
those,
was the battery.
and if they didn't have the battery after you got in so many levels in, they had the password. So you could type in a password
Yeah.
and basically go back to where it was. That was I remember not knowing that and getting frustrated because I couldn't get every time I tried to play, I forget what the game was. Every time I played it, I did the first like 2, 3 levels, and then I'd have to quit or go and do something, so I'd turn it off. I never knew that it was a password until much later, where if I would have written the password down, because after a level it showed numbers, like, okay, well, I don't know what that is, but that it wasn't until much later that I realized that games had that as an option of going back to your progress, and it changed depending on how many lives you had or whatever for
Yep.
various games.
And if you knew what you were doing, you could give yourself more lives by changing a certain part of the password.
I wasn't that intelligent.
One thing I remember, one of the big wars of the NES when it came to people that wanted to play role-playing games. There were several small ones, but the big war was the Ultima players versus the Final Fantasy players. And
Yep.
one of the big complaints that people had about Final Fantasy was you had to write those codes in, whereas the the Ultima games all came with the battery. So you save the game, shut it off, start it up the next time, and you pick up where you left off. But I was in the Ultima group.
Now that you mention that, I think it was one of the Final Fantasy games I was playing,
That sounds right.
because I remember it was some sort of RPG, but that was so long ago. I remember the first computer game I played, the first console game I played. I also remember the first console I had that was mine, and handheld as well.
That just got me to question. You both would probably know better than I would. I know that the Game Boy came out after the NES. Was it? It came out after the Super NES, didn't it?
No, it was before.
Was it?
Game,
Yep.
Game Boy Color came out after.
Well, I know Super NES had the Super Game Boy where you could actually plug your Game Boy cartridges and play them on the Super Nintendo.
Mhm.
But I
Game
do
Boy.
remember that that was one of the big advantages to the Game Boy was you could save your game on all of those.
As long as the internal battery didn't die.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've seen that happen.
I still have Pokemon games that have that happen, because they use that for up until like the DS. A lot of the Game Boy games had internal batteries in them,
That's the
or
nice
they had
thing
a
about.
password for some of the colors, but most of the colors had an internal battery. So it's
Yeah, I played all of the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance Pokemon games, and they all saved the game. But yeah, like you said, you always had to watch out, make sure you got a cartridge with a good battery, because I was always a cheapskate and bought used copies of all of my games when it came
I
to Game Boy.
you can replace them. It's actually not hard to do it in the Game Boy Advance. The issue is the packaging. If it cracks, you're fucked. I actually don't know how to do it with the Game Boy Color games. Like if it was red, yellow, or blue. I don't know how to do it with that. But crystal, gold, and silver, I can replace those. I'm assuming it's the same thing with the others. But I have a crystal version that battery in it is completely fried. I had a level 0 for alligator because I ran into Missino somehow. So the entire game itself is completely fucked. There is no fixing it. It itself is damaged. But my yellow still works like a charm. So I'm almost wondering if it doesn't actually use an internal battery, because I would think that it would have died long before the crystal version did.
Did any of you ever play with the Sega Game Gear?
Yep.
No.
That was an interesting experience. I had one of those for a little while and had a lot of the add-ons. There was things you could plug into it to turn it into a radio or a TV or all these other things. And it was pretty amazing because I had gotten one when I worked for St. Vincent de Paul. Somebody had donated one, and I picked it up for like $10, and it came in this case with all these attachments and everything. And it was pretty cool, but the thing would not keep a charge for any length of time. You basically had to keep it plugged in to play it, so it wasn't very portable.
Speaking of like attachments and stuff, y'all remember when VR was in only red colors?
Oh, the Virtual Boy.
So I got to try one, and I just know, which I find funny because if you think about it, everything that the Virtual Boy had is kind of what led to VR of today.
It's just the technology wasn't there yet.
Yeah.
There was a little bit in arcade games back in the time, but it was the same sort of pencil drawings. And fortunately, with those, they were using the black and white or green and white.
If you think about it, Duck Hunt, the gun for Duck Hunt using the infrared and everything, is basically what they used for the Wii. So technically, the Duck Hunt helped make the Wii.
Actually, no. Duck Hunt used a light gun.
I thought it used infrared.
No, use the light gun. Whenever you pull the trigger, there'd be like a frame or two of just like white hitboxes with the black background. If the zapper sensed white, it would register a hit. If not, it's a miss. That's why you could only use light guns with CRTs.
That's also a predecessor to the old laser tag guns, which all they had was basically a light emitter and a light receiver. And the receiver had a limited area. So that's how you knew you shot somebody in their little targeting thing on their chest or wherever it was.
I always thought it was infrared. Learn something new every day.
The more modern ones went to that sort of thing because it's more accurate.
And infrared wouldn't blind you accidentally.
I never got blinded from the Duck Hunt gun that we had.
Well, also infrared separate systems will actually work on like LCDs and OLEDs and plasmas.
Yeah.
Which of course is one big issue with restoring retro games, especially those with light guns, is finding CRTs.
The other thing you have to watch out for is certain televisions have things going at a certain like frame rate, it seems. And so older games will be a lot more laggy.
Yeah,
I've been having that with my Pokemon app.
For instance, I could plug in a Atari 2600 into a widescreen modern TV, and with the exception of some TVs that are more special, like smart TVs might give some problems, the Atari will work. Your pixels will be 1,000 times as big, but the game will run and give you no problems. Other games like the NES with Duck Hunt also, the NES is built like a tank. It'll run on anything. I've never seen a problem.
Just a few of the games that I've been having issues with it not wanting to work as efficiently. Like it skips things that if I plug it into a different TV, it doesn't skip. It only skips with like one of my televisions, which confuses me.
Are you playing console or PC on it?
Console. I'm using my N64. It just doesn't like one of the televisions, specifically with Pokemon Snap.
Interesting.
No idea why.
But I think that will do it for our little dive back into the past of gaming experience. Unfortunately, there weren't really any emails that we had because I constantly check. But if you have you'd like to tell us about your own gaming experiences of the past, you can send us an email, gamersperience@gmail.com, all lowercase, or at gamersperience on the X formerly known as Twitter. Again, the letters are all lowercase. Our DMs are open. Inbox is open.
From what I've heard, there are certain streaming platforms that apparently have a comment section. I don't know if that's actually a thing, but I keep
yes.
podcast. Send us a comment on
YouTube.
whatever you stream it on. Well, not just YouTube. Apparently, Spotify has it.
Yeah. I'm trying.
Send us comments on that.
Yeah, I try to update the questions that I can actually like put on Spotify. Please give us a rating.
I was just going to say that a good rating goes a long way on Spotify or any other streaming site, because the more people that see your site due to ratings, the more people it'll be sent to as a suggestion.
And if you like us, please tell others about it. We don't
Word
have
of
a
mouth
lot.
is what we've got.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of money, so we don't really have a marketing budget for ads.
And any money we would make from this goes back into this.
We make money from this?
Imaginary money. We're in the Monopoly world. We're giving Monopoly money. Every time we pass go, the issue, we haven't passed go in like forever. We keep hitting the go directly to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Well, shit.
Yeah, but again, thank you, Lord of Greyhawk and Preston, for recounting your gaming experiences from back in the day. I'm Not Much 23.
I'm ChoasAssassin.
And this is Gamer Experience. And as always, we invite you to have your own Gamer Experience.